Welcome to our discussion today about natural approaches to taming anxiety. Guaranteed to be insightful, and I'm glad to be sharing some of my 33 years of clinical practice. And this is a modular system. We all have our favorite things that we'd like to use, and these are just some insights that I've added to my favorites over the last few years. So let's talk about the endocannabinoid system. When there's an imbalance, it'll affect the adrenal glands and multiple other system pathways in the body. So whatever our pathway is that we're working on with our patients, always remember the endocannabinoid system most likely has one or more places it touches that pathway and therefore can infuse into a good protocol. We're talking about nutrient deficiencies and deficits and also sleeplessness, all that perpetuate anxiety and stress. Dr. Ethan Russo actually did phenomenal work in 2003 when he reported we can become endocannabinoid deficient. That means our anandamide and our pathways can become insufficient or worn out over the course of time, much like we can have adrenal fatigue or adrenal insufficiency. Well, both of these are often traveling companions. So if we're working with adrenal patients, we're really indirectly needing to address the endocannabinoid deficiency as well, because as you'll see, the HPA axis is regulated in part by the endocannabinoid system. So when we get to an allostatic load, we know that our homeostasis is going to become disrupted, and we're no longer going to be in that sweet zone where the vis matrix naturae, the innate power within the body to keep things upright and moving forward, is going to flourish. So the question is, how do we actually address this? Well, when Russo did his initial proposal in 2003, and it's been updated with his insights, he said, well, migraines and irritable bowel and fibromyalgia and a growing list of other conditions can be related to this endocannabinoid deficiency or insufficiency. Well, the same thing can be argued also, once again, for adrenal insufficiency. If we have low adrenal function, we're not going to make our hydrocortisone levels that 20 milligrams per day, and we're going to break through inflammation, aches and pains, and other symptomologies. So when we're treating adrenals or we're treating the endocannabinoid system, we're really wanting to treat both of them simultaneously. So we can always look at cortisol levels, and the beauty of this, so we can measure cortisol levels, a 24-hour urine, or once again, a salivary cortisol level. And so treating the adrenals and the endocannabinoid system together can actually allow for better outcomes. And when we test our patients, which I've done, of course, over the course of my career, and I'm going like, wow, I expected really terrible cortisol levels, and they're not there, but they have all the symptoms of a dysregulated hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. Well, maybe we need to look at the endocannabinoid system. So this is an out of thy world picture. It's cosmonauts, and cosmonauts, they actually looked at them, and it really gives us a tremendous insights as to why we need to look at the adrenal glands. So they have 12 cosmonauts. They've been up in space for some 140 days plus, and they monitored them before, after, and 2 points during the flight. And they were looking for classical markers. Hey, are you stressed out? We threw you up there with so many G's on the back of a rocket. Now you're weightless with no G's and traveling around the planet. And are you stressed? Well, the cellular cortisol level said, not really. But the endocannabinoid system says, wow, we're highly stressed in flight. And we have a biological stress response. It's a very good article to read, but showing that once again, our stress response is more than our adrenal cortex. Of course, it includes our adrenal medulla, but it also includes the endocannabinoid system. The Psychiatric Association did a little study this year, as they do every year, and they said, how stressed out are we as adults in North America? And the answer is we're 43% more stressed out than we were the previous year. And then you can see the previous years, 37% more in 2003 than 2022, and 2022 we're 32%. So we're just continuously getting more and more stressed. Of course, it's an election year, so 73% of people were stressed about the election. I'm surprised it was that low. Current events, 70%. The economy, 77%. Gun violence, 69%. And other factors that caught our attention was identity theft. You know, you lose your mortgage. Someone literally can claim your mortgage, and like, wow. What about your credit card theft? All these things, your health, your bills, your expenses, and even the AI side of things, that we are living in a brave new world, and technology is climbing and growing, but to a point that, once again, it's not about just staying up with it, or does it advance beyond us humanoids. So we need to somehow connect with that Zen-like state that maybe one of our ancestors 300 years ago got to enjoy, where things were okay. They looked outside, they had a free life, and they were able to walk, talk, see birds, eat their food, walk along the way, and nourish themselves, and literally not have all this chatter of modern living. Well, the Sanskrit word, as we know, for anad amide is based on the word anatta, internal bliss. And most of us don't really have that, wow, kumbaya-ness of when we sit at the top of a mountain, go for a mountain hike and not see or hear anybody. Or look at an ocean and just sit there and it's early in the morning or late in the evening, there's nobody on the beach. That's a calm connection, as close as we're probably going to ever get to what our ancestors got to enjoy before the helter-skelterness of modern society. So one of the characteristics that if we have an imbalanced endocannabinoid system is the inability to cope with stress. Well, I thought it was adrenal burnout, adrenal fatigue. Well, it can be that too. But the system becomes dysfunctional in people with PTSD, and stimulation of the endocannabinoid system actually inhibits the HPA axis that occurs after stress. So once again, if we're supporting it with some hemp-derived CBD, CBG, some maybe beta-caryophyllene, which we'll chat about relative to sleep and other mechanisms, it's like, yes, let's nurture these pathways which have been in us for millennia. And what's interesting is in male rodents, they did a study and they blocked the CB1 receptor, very prevalent in the central nervous system, and it took longer for them to actually recover their HPA axis and homeostasis. So once again, how do we treat the adrenals? And I can tell you for decades, I've been doing this for 33 years, I didn't even think about the endocannabinoid system directly because it wasn't until 1992 that we actually got the first glimpse of it and the true extent with Machulam and his team. And now it's like, wow, why aren't we doing this in our clinical practice? So the other interesting thing is as we're getting older, we know our nitric oxide levels are dropping, our ATP levels are dropping, our NAD levels are dropping. But look at this, significant concentrations of nitric oxide are found in the brain and adrenals, and nitric oxide may be involved in the stress response. So are we getting older and more grouchy? Are we getting older and more testy? Well, or are we just getting more old and more worn out? Well, during stress, anandamide suppresses activity of nitric oxide synthase enzyme, indicating that endocannabinoids may reduce stress by inhibiting the generation of nitric oxide in the hypothalamus and adrenals. But you say, well, wait, nitric oxide is a good thing. Generally it is, inducible nitric oxide, INOS, a whole nother conversation. But yes, we want ENOS, we want NNOS. And now if we're chronically stressed, are we dropping our nitric oxide? Well, it seems like yes, at least in these two tissues, I would argue elsewhere. The other thing I share with my patients, we look at the word adrenal, you don't actually see anything that resembles cortex or hydrocortisone, but what you do see is adrenaline, adrenal N. So when we get stressed out, we rob our dopamine, our contentment, to make norepinephrine and epinephrine, our stress hormones, that fight or flight of the adrenal medulla, which we often forget also is part and parcel. And that's why I'm doing neurotransmitter testing along with my cortisol testing. And I wish it was a really great, test to do the endocannabinoid system relative to data markers. I hope one day it comes out soon. The impaired endocannabinoid system has the ability to affect the GI tract. In fact, there's an article I wrote on PubMed that speaks about the endocannabinoid and how it affects stress, motility, sensations, onwards, also GI pain. And it's interesting that even our probiotics interact with our endocannabinoid receptors. So we're traveling along in our little pathway here, and we're looking for how do we help moderate and modulate this. Well, the endocannabinoid system signals the HPA axis to have homeostasis, to actually moderate excess or insufficient hydrocortisone. However, we can only sprint so long, that whole concept of the rabbit and the tortoise. So following a chronic stress exposure, the endocannabinoid system is involved in the physiology and behavioral habituation. So like, okay, I'm going to desensitize to this. This is just part of being a healthcare provider. There's stress. I run behind. Patients aren't always feeling great. My staff might not all be dialed in on a given day or some other event in the world. But when chronic stress leads to depression-like symptoms. A prominent aspect of this is the interaction between the endocannabinoid system and HPA axis. So are we wearing down our adrenal glands over a course of time? Yes. Are we wearing down our endocannabinoid system over a course of time? Yes. And are they traveling companions in a parallel universe within our body? The answer is a yes. So we want to look at how do we moderate that and use the endocannabinoid system to help deal with some of those allostatic loads, decrease the complete burden on the adrenal glands, and therefore let us sleep, let us be more rejuvenative and rejuvenate ourselves over the course of time relative to brain chemistry. So we have the integration of the endocannabinoid system. There's 3 little stars that are going to pop down here. And this one's interesting. Consistently, pharmacological enhancement of endocannabinoid system attenuates stress-induced HPA axis and helps with the receptors. And then they say the integral player in neuronal response and plasticity to stress. And we hear a lot about neuroplasticity these days. Are we stuck in the way in which we have to respond? No, there's many ways in which we can now have a new way to model and look through a different lens at our stress. And the endocannabinoid system plays a role here as well. So when we look at stress and the stress response, we think CB1, we think CB2, but we also think serotonin 5-HT1A. There's also a GR55 pathway. There's a TRPV1 pathway. There's a lot of different pathways, once again, in our body for millennia, and only now do we know how to support it a little bit better. So they did a double-blind randomized trial, and they looked at 600 milligrams of CBD. It reduced anxiety, helped with cognitive impairment in a simulated public speaking event. So it helped a person feel more comfortable. Big dose. Is that big dose necessary? Well, it depends on is it bioavailable or not, but once again, a positive outcome. So noteworthy, the concept here is to start low and go slow. Same thing if we were doing bioidentical hormones, let's say bias with a little progesterone and a tinge of testosterone, or if we're giving testosterone for a gentleman, do we want to overstimulate these receptors and have them down-regulate their sensitivity? The answer is no. Start low, go slow. When we come to PTSD, many people have PTSD, whether they realize it or not. We were children, we become adults, things happen, and the question is, how can we help with this? Well, 10 individuals with generalized social anxiety observed that 400 milligrams of cannabidiol was associated with decreased subjective stress. Imaging studies indicate that the endocannabinoid system is underactive in post-traumatic stress disorder. Well, what does that suggest? That it is ripe for a clinical intervention. So if you have a patient that, quote unquote, has the PTSD issues under control, that doesn't necessarily mean it's not nibbling like little rats at their toes. It just means that they've confined it. But can we help them truly moderate and mitigate some of those long-term sequelae and pathways within their neuronal pathways? And the answer, I think, yes. Preliminary studies in humans have observed that the cannabinoids may improve PTSD, including sleep and hyperarousal. And in an animal model, cannabinoids given shortly after a major traumatic event actually helps with the PTSD-like phenotype. We also know that the endocannabinoids are very important after traumatic brain injury, the physical brain injury. You hit your head, and I just recently had a patient fall off a treadmill in her mid-80s at Planet Fitness, conked her head really well. First thing we put her on was endocannabinoid support, and a term, in this case, of Vesizorb. So then we're going to look at CBD and its thoughts relative to stimulating neurogenesis and helping with the hippocampal. Okay, that's powerful. And then we look at anandamide was associated with higher levels with reduced anxiety in patients with major depression, and anandamide levels were not associated with major depressive symptoms. It was like, okay, we're going to have higher levels. So it's doing something now at the neuronal pathway. Think of our neurochemistry. And of course, it hurts to have anxiety. It hurts to have depression. And they looked conversely at people with minor depression, and anandamide concentrations were elevated compared to controls, but they also found a neuroprotective capacity potentially with less severe depressive symptoms. So once again, working at a multitude of ways in which we as clinicians at this juncture really don't know the full picture, or as Paul Harvey would say, a commentator back in the day, we must wait for the rest of the story. So what is the endocannabinoid system? It's complex. It regulates mood, sleep, appetite, pain, inflammation, memory, and multiple other aspects. It's working at the cellular level. And it's working at a cellular level in such a fashion that we actually have it as a modifier. I often look at it as the spice of life. It's helping moderate things and elevate the chemistry that's occurring that we do know about. And it's also helping at the mitochondrial level, as you can see here. It's like, wow. So we know at the mitochondrial level, we have T3 thyroid actually going down to the mitochondrial receptor and impacting how quickly and how well the mitochondria work. Now we have at the mitochondria also a CB1 receptor for the endocannabinoid system. So let's say you're working with anxiety or stress or endurance training or long haul COVID. Do we want to moderate the endocannabinoid system to help support the mitochondria? My clinical practice answer is yes. So then we look at how do we feel more at peace? So remember, the endocannabinoid system can help prevent the HPA axis from becoming underactive, and it can moderate overactiveness too. And you go once again back to the cosmonauts. What allowed them to stay in so much control that their adrenal glands actually stayed chillax? Yes, metaphor, chillax. So let's move on to sleep. This is our kitty cat Finnegan. His favorite way to sleep is upside down and often with his head below his rest of his body. But that's kind of Finnegan's issue and not ours, luckily. But the reality is we need to sleep. We all need to sleep. We all need to restore our body. And as you can see here, this is a hemp derivative with the Vesisorb technology. We'll discuss that in a moment, how it allows assimilation and absorption 4.4 plus times per pharmacokinetic state. And of course, it has melatonin. And we often forget that melatonin is not just for sleep, it's also anti-inflammatory, helps with cytokines, and actually even helps at the mitochondrial level again. When we're restoring our brain, it takes energy to do that. As we sit here, 20% of our oxygen, 20% of our glucose are, once again, going through and to our brain that only weighs 2% of our body weight. And there's lots of mitochondria up there needing to be aided and supported as well. So what about beta-caryophyllene, which is in the True Ease PM? And so once again, it's not just hemp, it's a derivative, it's a combination of things. And so it has hemp oils. And once again, we want things that are rich in terpenes, which are aromatic. In fact, most of us have become very fond of our essential oils. And terpenes influence the effects of the cannabinoids, modifying the way they interact with the receptors, enhancing their benefits. And some terpenes, but not most, but some, will actually interact directly. In the case of beta-caryophyllene, it does. It actually directly interacts with the cannabinoid receptor, and it governs the activation of one of the two primary receptors in the system. And once again, think of lavender and how it helps with people's sleep. Once again, when we look at a plant, we often think quasi-pharmaceutical. What's the active constituent? Can't there be more than one? And so when you can use a full spectrum, let's say of CBD or of a plant, with the actives delivered that we're moving the needle, but also the supporting actors. So once again, you might have a solo violinist, but once again, having a backup orchestra leads to a whole nother level of depth. So beta-caryophyllene also helps with inflammation and pain, which also, of course, as we know, impacts sleep. If you're achy, you're not going to be sleeping nearly as well. So they looked at the endocannabinoid system and regulating circadian rhythm, and the emerging research is very clear that helps with sleep. But also one study of participants with 160 milligrams of CBD slept more and awakened less during the night than those who received placebo. So remember the first study we talked about 600 milligrams, and we lowered to 400 milligrams. Now we're down to 160 milligrams, still moving the needle. And once again, if it's biologically active, you don't even need that much CBD if you have the pharmacokinetic study showing it 4.4 times higher bioavailability. It's all about absorption, as we know. And so another study looking at this also improved sleep and duration, and it lessened anxiety. And beta-caryophyllene has anxiolytic properties and can help us with sleep, encourage sleep. So we're working on the endocannabinoid system with the CBD and the other components. We're also helping with the beta-caryophyllene. Here's the study on the pharmacokinetics showing a 4.4 higher Cmax. So the area under the curve, much higher when using Vesisorb to deliver the CBD, cannabidiol. And this was a randomized, double-blind, crossover design, 16 healthy individuals under fasted conditions, trying to control for those variables and saying, hey, what happens? Well, it's 4.4 times higher bioavailability. So once again, a much smaller dose. And then you can, of course, multiply it by the 4.4. You can go for a liquid, which really allows for some titration of the Vesisorb technology. And unlike a liposome, this is a self-absorbing colloidal droplet delivery mechanism. So it's one step up plus beyond a liposome delivery mechanism. And if you don't want to taste it, you can, of course, do a soft gel as well. And the combination here, we mycelized, we have liposomal, and then we have Vesisorb colloidal droplets, which are self-assembling colloidal delivery mechanism proven to increase absorption of bioactives. So once again, it's about using technology to get the job done. And unlike a liposomal, which has a core of water, this is a core of oil. And what are the endocannabinoids and the terpenes? They're fat soluble. So it makes sense. Not going to spend a lot of time on this. You want to see more about Vesisorb technology, just go to truegen3.com. So what about a multivitamin? It seems so like, well, duh. Well, of course, we all know what we want to know relative to a multivitamin, but we know that the bioactive forms are important. We're very well schooled on MTHF and how folate may not convert as well if you have a 1298 heterozygousness and a 677T or some combination of that. You're homozygous, you're of course even less likely. But what about these other vitamins? Well, maybe there's a polymorphism for riboflavin. So let's get them to the completed form. Same thing with the B6, of course, the folate, which we're familiar with, the methylcobalamin, and then iodine. We have a lot of halides. Drink some Mountain Dew, get some brominated vegetable oil. Flame retardants, brominated. Fluoride in our water, and Prozac, Paxil, once again. So we want to have iodine. We want to balance out the halides. Plus, iodine actually helps with IQ and focus and concentration and has some anti-disease processes benefits as well. Of course, we want to have our minerals and bioavailable forms. But then I think the other big thing is we don't eat our fruits and vegetables like we ought to. Mom was right, and we fail epically in not eating our 5 to 7 servings of fruits and vegetables, with rare exception. And I'm speaking particularly of our patients. And of course, everything's much more expensive these days. So we can have an extract, some of the phytonutrients and phytochemicals, wonderful. And as we all sit in front of computers and iPhones and tablets and so forth, we want to be helping with the lutein, zeaxanthin, anthocyanin, because the back of our eye and that lovely little nerve back there is getting barraged by blue light, blue light, blue light. We were told as kids, don't stare at the sun, but we're staring at bright blue light all day long. So what about food quality? Well, I eat organic, so I'm doing good. Well, let's look at that. So University of Washington, I'm here in Oregon, but University of Washington looked at regenerative farming, and the soil was darker and more black and rich from regenerative farming, but it goes so far beyond that. So they looked at 10 different areas across the country, and they did regenerative farming. This was 2022 article. And they actually found that the soil was not only healthier, but what it delivered was healthier. The food grown under regenerative practices contained on average more magnesium, calcium, potassium, and zinc, more vitamins including B1, B12, C, E, and K2, and phytochemicals. And I think the phytochemicals catch all of our attention. Phytonutrients, so vitally important. We have our macro and micronutrients and all of this, but what about all these phytochemicals, which we know have very expansive health benefits? Crops grown in regenerative farms were also lower in things such as sodium, cadmium, nickel. So that's interesting. And across the board, we found that regenerative practices imbue, I love the word imbue our crops with more anti-inflammatory compounds and antioxidants. So I wish we could all say, I have my organic food items from it or a regenerative farm, but we don't. And so we once again want to supplement a good diet. So why we and our patients need a full spectrum? We're not eating our fruits and vegetables. Centers for Disease Control say 10% of us do get our fruits and vegetables. So that's a consideration. But the other thing is We're no longer in Kansas. We live in a toxic world. We have helter-skelterness. We have 5G. We have EMF wireless. And we have a constant stream of, can you hear me now? And the answer is, back in the day when they did that Verizon commercial, can you hear me now? Not only can we hear you now, we can hear you in our sleep, because there's just too much news feed, and often it's very negative and very stressful, and that causes physiological changes. As we age, we get nutrient deficiency, we get achlorhydria, hyperchlorhydria, and that's a problem. And of course, our digestive tract has to be functioning. So many of us in our clinical practice are working with patients that are trying to rebuild themselves from their GI tract upwards. But if they're not absorbing their macro, micronutrients, or phytonutrients, it's once again like building a house with no straw, sticks, or bricks. And so the research indicates taking a multivitamin compensates for these deficiencies. This is all very self-evident, obviously. But now let's look at some research here. Why food alone is not enough. So they looked at 2023, a published trial, and they found the following in older men. They looked at lipids and metabolic levels and A1C and ferritin and all these other vitamins and oxygen consumption by monocytes. So looking at immunological function. And they're like, okay, well, let's see what happens. We're going to give them either a multivitamin for 6 months or placebo. And what they found was that those men that were in the placebo group experienced a decline in their nutritional markers many times, suggesting that food alone was not enough. So once again, if we're not taking a multivitamin, we're in the placebo group. And the men in the placebo group also had reduced oxygen consumption, which didn't happen in the men with a multivitamin, suggesting that a multivitamin supported white blood cell function. Because remember, they were looking at monocyte levels. But it also, of course, affect red blood cells and all of our peripheral tissues. So important to note. So a systemic review and meta-analysis of multivitamins for 80,148 subjects found people not taking multivitamin or that were taking a multivitamin were actually more likely to have strong, healthy bones, particularly hip bones. Meta-analysis of 10 trials found that multivitamins use improved free recall of memory. Once again, neurotransmitters, you're anxious or depressed. How's your brain chemistry? How's your recall? Are you forgetting words? Are you forgetting the reality and the good things in your life? Yes. So once again, back to anxiety, back to depression, back to building that strong foundation. And a multivitamin is important. And plus, if we don't have enough B vitamins, we're not going to recall our dreams as well. I find that when I give my patients a bioactive B vitamin, like in this multivitamin we're talking about, the True Gen 3 Multi, then all of a sudden they're recalling their dreams. This is how we defrag our hard drive. Dreams are a way in which we process stuff. We don't need to be Jungian or Freudian about it. But once again, dreams serve a function beyond merely entertainment as we sleep. In a study of middle-aged and older adults, they looked at food alone, multivitamins, and lower prevalence of nutrient inadequacies, and improved levels of folate, iodine, selenium, the B vitamins, and D, in obese individuals. Well, of course, we have a weight issue in this country. And a couple of studies looked at the efforts of multivitamins on mood and stress. In one of these studies, multivitamins use improved mood and well-being. Remember, our topic today is anxiety, and the yin to the yang is when you're anxious, eventually there's going to be emotional letdown. You're going to have depression because you've blown through a lot of brain chemistry. And if you're depressed, eventually you heal and mend up a little bit, hopefully. And then you're primed towards anxiety, which will then drop you back into depression. So we need to fortify things, and that's where the endocannabinoid system comes into play to help tone things up and help with the sympathetic and parasympathetic tone, and of course the vagal nerve as well. In another study, older men, multivitamins use reduced everyday stress and improved mood compared to placebo, and multivitamins also help them be more alert and productive. So we want to change our brain chemistry to a healthier state of being where we're no worries, man. And the fact that CBD interacts with dopamine receptors is an evidence that the endocannabinoid system can work. What is dopamine? We know it's our contentment hormone. It's our Winnie the Pooh hormone. Give us our little pot of honey and we're really quite fulfilled and content. But when was the last time we and our patients had that Winnie the Pooh moment? Also, CBD helps promote and relax with mood and stress. And here's our Winnie the Pooh. And there's Eeyore. Looks like hurricane weather. Oh, I've got my pot of honey. I need some more honey. That's Winnie the Pooh. And the other extreme is that wired, anxious, a little attention deficit Tigger, which is not sustainable. Once again, tortoise and the hare, or in this case, the Tigger. So we have the aqueous form. The aqueous form will actually help with the liquid and absorption of the CBD. So it's a liquid form. And so if you want to just titrate very slowly, one drop, one drop, one drop, or half a dropper full into a dropper full, you could do it that way. And or you can just do it in the soft gel form, either way. And remember, the cannabinoid receptors and the endocannabinoid system signals many functions in the central nervous system. You can see neuronal development. How about if a stressed out mom is having another child? Is it potentially going to affect how much endocannabinoids she has? Much like if her microbiome isn't healthy, is that going to affect the baby? If her essential fatty acid status isn't adequate, is that going to affect the baby? If her fluoride to iodine levels are off, is that going to affect cognition? So once again, and overall neuronal development. But appetite, anxiety, depression, all endocannabinoid system, 2018 article. Liver health, insulin resistance, fertility issues, GI motility, and multiple other factors. So when we treat one aspect of the body, all the ships in the harbor rise when we actually tone and tune things up. And the endocannabinoid system is much like the neuronal integral roots of a massive ancient forest. All the trees are talking to the other trees through the mycelia and the network. And so once again, the connectivity here is not just one part of the body or other part of the body or one hormonal system or another hormonal system, but just like we learned today about the HPA axis and the endocannabinoid system, how much more integrated is it that we even can imagine? So we want to support the endocannabinoid system. It's been working for humanity for millennia. Subclinical deficiency of the endocannabinoid system is a genuine concern. Immune competence involves a healthy endocannabinoid system. And so once again, if you want to have a healthy immune system, there's an article that's well worth looking at on PubMed on respiratory syncytial virus and endocannabinoid receptors. And if there's two siblings, one with a polymorphism of an endocannabinoid receptor and the other one not, their likelihood of being hospitalized with RSV is different, dramatically different. We know CBD and other phytocannabinoids are actually involved in not only being a powerful tool for our toolbox, but toning up other things, not only the PTSD, not only anxiety, not only sleep, not only inflammation, but integrating other pathways in our body which are outside of our reach. The PubMed article I mentioned on endocannabinoids and the fact that even our microbiome impacts these, very, very powerful. And also dosing, we start with a low dose, we can always work up. But once again, nudge, not shove. The biochemistry of the human body, as we know, is not grams or milligrams or kilograms. It's nanos and picos and very small amounts at the cellular level. So often when you have a well-absorbed substance, it doesn't take that much to get the job done. If you want to see some additional educational resources, I have a 10-chapter book on CBD free at TrueGen 3. Lots of educational content and articles. And once again, we all learn from one another. It's an exciting time. And with technology, we can actually learn and infuse this into our clinical practice. I always love learning from each of you as well, because often you'll share a little clinical pearl after listening to one of my presentations. So some of us are naturopaths, we're functional medicine providers for sure, and we're trying to go along that path that nature has provided us. And the endocannabinoid system and ensuring that we have good nourishment with a multivitamin and making sure that we get sleep for restoration are all foundational. And so I'm an independent educator for TrueGen 3. Feel free to reach out to them. And if you mention this webinar, they may be running a promotion. I'm uncertain. Thank you. Have a good one and take care.